I'm here outside Bend, Oregon, and there's a big old solar facility right here. High voltage, keep out, authorized personnel. What's going on back here? They don't want you breaking into these places, but I'm in the facility now, so you can see this up close. You'll notice this is all dusty. So these things have to be cleaned pretty regularly, so most people don't realize that solar panels and solar power facilities are actually huge water users. And they like to install them in desert areas where water use is already a big problem. These elements are made of silicon, which is mined and refined using extremely high temperature destructive processes. Then they're mounted on these big steel pipes here. Look at this. I mean, this is just an industrial energy production facility. It has nothing to do with saving the planet whatsoever. It may have a slightly lower carbon footprint than fossil fuels, but of course this all requires fossil fuels to create. The steel was all made using coal. All this material was trucked here using diesel trucks, extracted all over the world using massive mining trucks powered by diesel, smelted using fossil fuels, assembled at plants likely powered by fossil fuels, and all of this destroys the planet no matter where the power comes from. So this shit ain't green.
We are told that we can have our cake and eat it too, that we can maintain a high-energy lifestyle without destroying the planet. We are told that solar, wind, hydro, and biomass are clean, green, and sustainable. What they don't talk about are the unseen harms caused by these technologies, the processes which take place out of sight. People rarely question the solutions they are taught to embrace. But with all the world at stake, we must start asking the right questions. There is a push for a 100% renewable world, and after the research I've done for this documentary, I want no part of it. I did not become an environmentalist to protect my way of life, or the civilization in which I live. I did it because I am in love with life on this planet, and because the world I love is under assault. This film is for those whose allegiance is with the living world, those who would do whatever it takes to defend it.
The environmental movement used to be a very impassioned group of people who cared deeply about the places we loved and the creatures we loved. What's happened, though, in my lifetime is that this movement that was so honorable and so impassioned has turned into something completely different. And now it's about protecting a destructive way of life while it destroys the creatures and the places that we love. It's all become, how do we continue to fuel this destruction? As if the only problem was the fact that we were using oil and gas.
You will have hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets of Washington or New York or Paris, and if you ask those individuals, why are you marching? They will say, we want to save the planet. And if you ask them for their demands, they will say, we want subsidies for the wind and solar industries. That's extraordinary. I can't think of any time in history when any mass movement has been so completely captured and turned into lobbyists for an industry. Frankly, solar, hydro, all of them do a great big fuck all to stop global warming. But what they do is they make us think we are accomplishing something while certain sectors of industry get rich.
The natural world isn't really part of the conversation anymore. You know, Kumi Naidoo, the former head of Greenpeace, I was watching him being interviewed the other day, and he was saying, you know, look, the planet's going to survive, the oceans are going to survive, the forests are going to survive. It's really about, can we save ourselves or not? And I just saw that, I'm thinking, what the hell are you saying? This is somebody who's considered to be, you know, one of the top environmentalists in the world, and he's saying we don't have to worry about the forests or the oceans? I mean, to me, that just betrays a complete lack of empathy and connection to the natural world. I don't know how you could possibly say that when we're in the midst of the sixth great mass extinction, and it's being caused by industrial culture. It's being caused by the same institutions the same economies, the same systems, the same raw materials, the same extractive mindset that is being used for these renewable energy technologies.
Bright green environmentalism is founded on the notion that technology will solve environmental problems and that you can, through 100% recycling, through wind and solar power, have an industrial economy that does not harm the planet. Deep ecology is the belief that we need to radically change the way society functions in order to be sustainable.
I'm in New Hampshire, getting ready to film a clear cut. The activist I'm meeting sent footage he captured of animals who live in the forest. All these creatures who live here, their homes are being destroyed to provide so-called green energy in the form of biomass.
Biomass is one of the big dirty secrets of the bright green movement. What biomass is simply a fancy word for burning stuff. What they're doing is they are cutting down forests all over the world and burning them and calling this biomass, calling this renewable, calling this carbon neutral. They will talk about how, oh, renewables are growing X% every year, but what they never talk about is that, for example, in their German miracle, the majority of the increase in so-called renewables is biomass. It's not wind and solar like they talk about. That's because they don't really want to talk about the fact that their so-called renewable energy is simply cutting down forests.
So they sell these timber sales.
Yep.
Last year they got revenue of about $550,000.
Okay.
Their timber program costs at least $3 million to implement. Not only are they removing our trees, not only are they removing the only thing we have to sequester carbon on this earth, but we pay for it.
Wow. That's insane.
It is insane. It's completely insane. And people don't, explain that, you tell people that, like, nah. Yeah, absolutely. We, the US taxpayers, subsidize these guys to kill trees. The problem we have right now, and the thing I always fight these guys on, is that we have a carbon problem right now.
Yeah.
You know, we're at 400 parts per million or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, you know, and they'll say, well, yeah, but that tree will regrow. Yeah, but that's 100 years from now. Mm-hmm. Where are we going to be then? 600 parts per million? I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you leave that tree there, that tree is going to continue not only to sequester the carbon that's in it right now, mm-hmm. but the carbon that in the next 100 years, right. that it would have taken to 100 plus years to replace that tree. It's sequestering that much more carbon mm-hmm. in that one tree.
Yeah.
So.
Just totally sets you back to remove it.
Oh yeah. So I mean that's what makes, so then you go to the whole thing of whole tree harvesting, where not only do they take the bole of the tree, they take everything. That's removing everything from the equation.
Yeah, and then you burn it for biomass. And
then you burn it and it goes poof, and all that carbon is instantly released into the atmosphere that's already overloaded with carbon. It's kind of like a spider web. You have all these trails going off. That's the beginning of the clear cut. I mean, you walk up the thing and then it's going to hit you in the face. An old forest has carbon as part of the trees, the soil, the branches. That's all carbon that is currently sequestered and is not going out into the atmosphere. You cut that tree down, not only does it stop sequestering carbon, but it actually starts emitting carbon from the soil that's left because the soil's been disturbed.
To generate a unit of electricity, biomass will release more carbon than coal will. And coal's plenty dirty enough.
Well, we're looking at the aftermath of a 245-acre whole tree harvest liquidation cut, where effectively they removed all of the above ground biomass, almost all the trees. They left a couple of pine here and there, one or two little patches that they didn't cut, but effectively it's a 245 acre clear cut.
To call it carbon neutral, you have to do some pretty dishonest accounting. For instance, the European Union doesn't count the carbon it released in its burning in its calculations, whereas the American forests that are supplying the carbon don't count the carbon they're releasing during the harvesting. Now, the justification is we don't want to count it twice, so we don't count it at all. And now it's carbon neutral. Well, you got to count it once, folks. And when you count it once, it doesn't matter whether it's the carbon released from the burning of it or whether you count the carbon stored in that forest that you've liquidated, because now it's going to be burned and it's going to be released. So I guess I'm not comfortable with an industry that deceives me about something as important as climate change.
As forests get older, they sequester more and more carbon. They sequester more and more carbon per year. Every time you cut down the forest, you are removing lots of biomass and you're removing lots of nutrients. You're completely stressing out the forest. You're removing all those who live there, and you are somehow expecting it to recover. I love the line by John Livingston, there is no surplus in nature. Every tree that's taken out was a home for someone else and was food for someone else.
Bright green environmentalists love pointing out examples of countries that have switched to renewable energy. But there are a lot of inconsistencies in these claims. One problem is that they will often imply this energy comes from solar and wind, when the majority of this so-called green energy comes from hydro.
Hydro is incredibly destructive. Dams destroy the regions below the dam, they destroy the river above the dam, they kill the fish who can no longer move up and down the river, dams increase the water temperature, and then to sort of top all this off, dams are claimed to be carbon neutral, but that's been known for decades not to be true. That there are those who call dams methane bombs because they release so much methane. One of the reasons they produce methane is that when the reservoir first rises, it will, of course, inundate the land above. And when the forest has been inundated, it then decays in anaerobic conditions and produces methane. It is almost the prototypical bright green lie in that they claim it is good for the environment when actually it is harmful for the environment, and it is harmful for even global warming purposes. It succeeds on no level.
One of the pioneering writers in this field is a guy named Ozzie Zahner, who wrote a book called Green Illusions. And he starts off the book with a story from when he was working doing solar installations. And he was in Washington, D.C., and these politicians wanted to install solar panels on their roof. So he went to their house to check out the site and see what it would look like so he could give them a quote. And he got there and assessed the situation, and he went back and talked to them, and he said, look, you've got these beautiful old oak trees growing on the south side of your house. And if you want to put in solar panels on your roof, we're going to have to cut these trees down. And I would actually recommend that you don't install the solar panels, because both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and your electricity bill, these trees are providing a greater benefit by shading your house in the summer, by protecting it from winds in the winter, than the solar panels would. And the people said, we don't care about that. We actually want you to go ahead and cut them down and install the solar panels anyway. And I think that really gets to the fundamental issue with these technologies, is that for many people, they're more about a status symbol and an indication of some sort of greener than thou mindset that's going on than they are an actual solution.
If you can install a solar panel on your roof, you may not directly be seeing any smoke come out of any smokestacks, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. You can't produce a solar/wind infrastructure without fossil fuels.
To produce solar panels, you need extremely high purity silicon, something like 99.999% pure. And that's not found in nature. But what you have to do is you have to go find the purest silicon deposits that you can. And this is usually in the form of sand mining. And this happens around the world, and it's highly, highly destructive.
Because of the demand for high quality silica, there are islands off the coast of China that have disappeared completely. They have mined the island out of existence. They require rare earths, and much of the rare earth minerals come from Baotou in China. And Baotou is essentially devoid of wildlife. And there is a basically 19 square mile tailings pond, tailings lake, in which nothing can grow. So don't tell me this has no effects. Don't tell me this is environmentally neutral.
Mining, pollution, carbon emissions. The production of renewable technologies has obvious environmental impacts. I wanted to see what mainstream environmental organizations were saying about so-called green energy. NRDC, our work, climate change. Fighting climate change by cutting carbon pollution and expanding clean energy is the best way to build a better future for our children. Policy solution, increase renewable energy, bolster global clean energy financing, World Wildlife Fund, climate, create a climate resilient and zero carbon world powered by renewable energy. Sierra Club, they're advocating for people to sign a petition telling members of Congress to support a Green New Deal. David Suzuki Foundation, Canadians overwhelmingly support a quick transition to efficient, zero-emissions energy. Clean energy. Clean energy. Clean energy provides a wide array of services. Clean electricity will replace fossil fuels. Okay, this is Greenpeace. Renewable energy is cheap, sustainable, and already making our planet more green and peaceful. It disrupts corporate energy systems. It's great for our health, and there's nothing better for our planet.
You know, why don't we imitate a forest and try to do what the forest does? Take this clean, free energy and use it. And that, to me, is the opportunity. I think that every bit of our clothing should be a solar panel. I've got a backpack that's got a solar panel on it, and I can charge my laptop and my cell phone right from the my backpack. I think that hats and everything, in France now, they're building 1,000 kilometers of highway, and the highway is a solar panel. And that highway, 1,000 kilometers, will service, I don't know how many 100,000 homes. And the same thing with concrete sidewalks. Our buildings should be wrapped in solar panels, not just have them up on the roofs, but everywhere that sunlight hits. Let's grab that and use it the way that a forest does.
It's hard for me to see many similarities between forests and solar energy generation facilities. We all know solar panels don't grow out of the ground. They require a global supply chain and a functioning industrial economy, with all the mining, shipping, manufacturing, and environmental harms inherent to these processes. While forests sequester carbon, provide habitat, and promote biodiversity, solar electric generating facilities require habitat destruction, both at the site where they're installed and around the world, where the materials to make them are extracted. While editing this film, I researched the solar highway in France. Turns out, it broke shortly after it was installed. One publication described it as a total disaster. Solar and wind have been called alternative fossil fuels because they require fossil fuels at every stage of the production process. So the mining, the shipping, the manufacturing.
Yeah.
It might be less than fossil fuels, but it still adds up to quite a bit.
You don't get anything for nothing. Yeah, you know, to lay the asphalt highway that France is, you use a lot of fossil fuels. And that's the dilemma we're in. It seems to me that we have to get off the deliberate burning of fossil fuels that can be replaced with electricity, and we have to minimize the carbon that we use in creating the products that are really going to give us a big edge. But you don't get anything for nothing. And there's no question, you know, you think of all the metals that go into a windmill, even the servicing is going to take fossil fuels to get up there, and yeah. But it's a question of, are they in the long term, are they going to reduce our carbon footprint in a long-term way?
That's the real question. Do solar panels and wind turbines actually reduce carbon emissions in the long term? There's an assumption that when you add energy from solar or wind to the grid, it displaces fossil fuels. But this isn't what we're seeing in the real world.
This is really one of the key elements in the Bright Green Vision, is this idea that as you bring more and more green energy online, you turn off more fossil fuels. You don't need them anymore, so you can get rid of them. And that's just not happening. If you actually look at the data, the increase in renewable energy, that power is generally added on top of what's already available from coal power plants, from fossil fuel power plants, from nuclear, from hydro, and so on.
Research I've done looking at data on many nations over time, mostly over the past 5 decades or so, shows that there's not a strong rate of suppression when you add non-fossil fuel energy of suppressing fossil fuel use. It takes maybe 4 to 10 times more non-fossil fuel energy to get 1 unit reduction in fossil energy, controlling for what you'd expect from growth of population, GDP, and so forth. If you look at the trends in all energy sources, roughly speaking, they've all grown rapidly. Fossil fuels, when you add natural gas, you don't see any suppression per se of coal or oil consumption. Nuclear power doesn't seem to have a strong effect on the others, meaning all energy sources are consumed as their production increases. And so I've called that the displacement paradox, just meaning, you know, we might assume that one would displace another, it would push the other out in proportion. And we don't see that, or we don't see it strongly. To the extent there's displacement, it's certainly not 1 for 1. But if you think about it, most industries, companies, corporations, they're trying to make profits. They're trying to expand production and consumption. They're not trying to conserve resources. So that's historically, new energy sources have just allowed for more growth, more production, more consumption. If we want to push out fossil fuels, I think we need to push out fossil fuels rather than just hoping producing more wind or solar will do that naturally in the marketplace.
All these energy sources are being brought online. They tend to add on top of the fossil fuel sources. They don't tend to displace them. So it takes on average about 10 units of like solar or wind to displace 1 unit of fossil fuel energy as they're just being added to the grid.
Yeah. So what is the conclusion from an analysis like that? We shouldn't do anything.
No.
Is it saying it's making it worse by trying to come up with a solution?
No, it's not that. It's just maybe we're looking in the wrong places for solutions. That maybe we need to tackle this on a more systemic level. And
Yeah. There's no question. I mean, our major impact on the planet now, not just in terms of energy, is consumption. And that was a deliberate program. After all, you're way too young, but I remember the impact of the Great Depression, the 1930s. My mom and dad were married in the 1930s, and that was a terrible time. And people learned to live and, you know, cooperate and act together. In many ways, communities were much stronger and tighter back then because you had to. What brought us out of the Depression was World War II. Wars are great for bringing economies up. As the war was coming to an end, the U.S. president said, "Holy, we're going to win this." But what do we do with the economy in peacetime? So he asked his Council of Economic Advisors, how do you transition a wartime economy to a peacetime economy? And their answer was consumption. You've got to make consumption an American way of life. Buy things, use them up, throw them away, and buy more. And it works. 70% of the North American economy now is about consumption. So we have a real pickle because the economy now has been so dedicated to consumption. And we think that the economy has got to be kept growing. Well, constant growth is the creed of cancer cells. Cancer cells think they can grow forever.
What is the energy being used for? Within this culture, production is the conversion of the living to the dead. It's the conversion of living forests to 2x4s. A living forest is not counted. All these fish in the oceans, they don't actually count. What happens is when the fish get killed and then converted into fish sticks, then that adds to the GNP.
Alternative energies both support and are produced by the industrial system that's killing the planet. So when people talk about 100% renewable energy transition to save the planet, to save civilization, what they're actually talking about is sustaining modern high energy ways of life at the expense of the natural world.
I think we often have this image that it's wind power and solar power companies competing with fossil fuel power companies. And I think that, that varies on ownership, but a lot of times it's the same company that owns wind power and fossil fuels. That's the nature of economies. The companies are involved in these activities to make money. They're not trying to displace or change other things. When a company invests in wind power, it's typically an economic decision. And that doesn't mean that they're then trying to use less fossil fuel. And the irony is, a lot of times the profits that come from renewable energy can be invested anywhere in the economy. And I think that's another misunderstanding about economies, capitalist economies. If you make profits from wind power, that doesn't mean those profits are invested in wind power. They can be invested anywhere. So some of the irony is those profits can also be invested in expanding fossil fuel extraction.
I lived for a number of years in Salt Lake City, and the largest copper mine in the world was about 10 miles from my house. And that mine is called the Bingham Canyon Mine. It's been operating for 100 years, and it's a mountaintop removal mine. It's one of the largest man-made holes on the planet. Copper production is absolutely essential for green technologies. A single wind turbine generator, maybe a 5 megawatt design, probably has something like 1,000 pounds of copper in it. So people like Mark Jacobson, who are calling for 100% renewable energy, he's calling for 3.8 million 5 megawatt turbines to be built. Now multiply that by 1,000 pounds of copper per turbine, and you've got a lot of copper. I think it would be about 6 years of the full production from the Bingham Canyon mine, which again is the largest copper mine in the world. So when people say that wind turbines are clean and green and sustainable, I think it's completely out of touch with reality.
Well, my goals are to develop clean and renewable energy solutions to global warming, air pollution, and energy insecurity. So I do this by going state by state in the U.S. and country by country and developing clean and renewable energy plans that require electrifying all energy sectors, including electricity, which is already electrified, transportation, heating and cooling, industry, agriculture, forestry, and fishing. And then providing that electricity with 100% clean, renewable wind, water, and solar power, and also involving storage and some additional transmission as well.
What percentage of the electricity would be from what, like solar, wind, or like what percentages would they take up?
Well, in a 100% clean, renewable energy economy worldwide, we probably have around 55% solar, maybe 40% wind, and the rest of it is it's going to be everything else, like hydroelectric, geothermal, tidal, wave power in small quantities. So it's going to be mostly solar and wind.
Wind energy, of course, is produced by these giant turbines that they'll erect in the windiest places they can find. And they've been doing it for a long time now. One of the first production scale wind facilities was down in California near the Bay Area. And they called that particular place the Cuisinart for birds because it killed so many birds. And that's one of the first problems that these wind turbines cause, is they kill a lot of birds and they kill a lot of bats. What happens with bats is that they'll be flying near the blades, and as the blades move, they're creating such a massive pressure differential between the front of the blade and the back of the blade that their lungs will explode. And it's called barotrauma. It's a pressure injury, essentially. And I'm sure a pretty horrible way to die. And so the impacts on bats and birds alone are reason enough to never support wind energy.
If you talk to these mainstream so-called environmentalists about the bird deaths from windmills or the bat deaths from windmills, they will oftentimes say, well, there's a lot more birds die from cats, or a lot more birds die from skyscrapers, as though that makes it okay.
Buildings kill 1 billion birds per year, and cats kill about 3 billion birds per year. So it's really a red herring to talk about birds' deaths due to wind turbines.
And I think about this in terms of a medical model, that if you have someone in a hospital who has, for example, AIDS, and they have 7 different opportunistic infections are going after them, you don't say, well, it doesn't matter if we add MRSA to the mix, does it? Just because there's one bad thing can happen to you doesn't mean you don't prevent the second bad thing. And it's the same with all these wind energy facilities, that just because there are birds who die flying into skyscrapers doesn't mean you should kill 200 million more every year with wind energy generators. It makes no sense. You would think, here's the thing, is if there were no other threats to them, then maybe you could consider this, except still for those 200 million birds it'd be bad. But when the bird populations are collapsing anyway, you're adding another threat? Are you nuts? This is horrible.
So what would be the impact on birds and bats if we had 40% wind energy?
Yeah, we would reduce bird and bat deaths by about a factor of 10 compared to what they are from fossil fuels. So, in other words, wind turbines kill birds. The American Bird Conservancy estimates in the United States about 400 to 500,000 birds per year are killed. But we also know that oil, coal, and gas, for example, they kill birds at a rate that is 10 times higher per unit energy than wind power does, due to not only destroying their habitats by all the mining that goes on.
One of the first rules of propaganda is if you can slide your premises by people, you've got them. And so if you can frame a question as, well, look, lots of birds are going to die from global warming, so instead, what if we only have 200 million birds a year die from windmills? Isn't that better? Okay, what is inherent in that question is the notion that the world needs industrial energy, and that the choice is between burning oil and gas and coal and having wind turbines. But that's not the choice for multiple reasons. One reason that's not the choice is because there is nothing inevitable about industrial production. It is a social choice. And given that the planet is being killed because of those choices, you would think we would make different choices.
Do you think it would be better for the natural world if we just didn't use energy?
Well, I suppose that would be nice, but yeah, it's not a really practical thing. But it's definitely, it would be nice if we didn't use energy, but then how would we, we would not be able to survive.
Gosh, I wonder how humans survived for the past 200,000 years without electricity. Could it be that we don't actually need electricity for our survival?
Electricity is a convenience. It is a luxury. Humans have survived for tens of thousands of years without industrial electricity. And there's a real question as to whether humans will survive with industrial electricity.
What is energy used for when it's produced in this society? It's used for the military. It's used for producing cheap consumer goods. It's used for entertainment. It's used for transportation. It's mostly used for these non-essential luxuries that are destroying the planet in one way or another.
This is Ivanpah. It's a concentrated solar power system located in southeastern California. A field of mirrors concentrates sunlight on a central tower, heating a fluid inside to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The light from the mirrors attracts insects, and the insects attract birds. The concentrated sunlight burns every creature who flies overhead.
Before you can commit any mass atrocity, you have to have what Robert J. Lifton calls a claim to virtue. And what he means by that is that no one ever admits to causing an atrocity. That internally, you have to make yourself out to be the good person. And so, from their own perspective, the Nazis weren't committing mass murder and genocide, they were purifying the Aryan race. And today, capitalists are not killing the planet, they are developing natural resources. And how this relates to the bright greens is the bright greens are not, in fact, killing the planet, but they are saving the planet. Unfortunately, they might have to kill part of the desert to do it. And so you can see headlines like harming the desert to save the world. That was before they put in this solar power generation facility that caused great harm to birds, caused great harm to desert tortoises, great harm to the landscape. It's all a claim to virtue. The planet itself does not need solar power generation facilities. The planet needs to have this stopped. There are some estimates that solar energy generation facilities, by 2050, they could be the greatest threat to habitat. That's how many they want to put in. It's extraordinary what you can get by. We've got a claim to virtue, as we saw with the Holocaust, as we're seeing with the murder of the planet. I've seen environmentalists, sort of mainstream bright green environmentalists, applauding the construction of gigantic battery factories in Nevada simply because they're for electric automobiles. And that's nuts. Environmentalists in general have historically been pretty decent on being opposed to electronics. And environmentalists historically have been pretty strong in being opposed to automobiles. But somehow, if you combine electronics and automobiles, then suddenly it's a good idea. That's crazy. Never mind the fact that most of the pollution coming from an automobile does not emerge from the tailpipe. It's in the construction vehicle. And never mind the fact that there are about 228 trillion insects killed per year by cars. There are about 2 billion vertebrate animals killed every year by cars. And I don't care whether they're electric cars or diesel or gasoline engine, it doesn't matter. And that's only those who are killed directly. Roads fragment habitat, punching in roads into new areas, make it so loggers can follow, miners can follow, all sorts of destruction follows. And somehow if it's an electric vehicle, it's supposed to be okay.
Of course, electric cars, like a lot of the other green technologies, are getting huge subsidies. There are these tax credits, there are write-offs, there are government rebates, and this is a public subsidy coming directly from our tax dollars and going to corporations. And it's incentivizing them to build more cars, to build more factories, to build more parking lots, to build more shopping malls, to build more highways, to build more roads, to invest in car culture as a whole.
There's a headline the other day that was pretty funny. It was about how by putting all these electric cars on the road, Tesla could reduce oil consumption in the United States by about 300,000 barrels per day. Sounds like a lot until you realize that in 2015, U.S. oil consumption for transportation was about 20 million barrels per day. So this is a whopping 1.5% decrease by 2030 at the cost of lithium mines around the world, at the cost of all these additional cars being made that are going to actually cost God knows how many barrels per day to manufacture. I know that the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta and other groups in Nigeria have reduced oil output by up to 60% through acts of sabotage on oil rigs there. And they have done so with really no time lag. They reduce the oil output in real time. Ask yourself, from the perspective of non-humans, or of poor humans, or of any creature going to be driven extinct by global warming, or by roads, or by cars, which would you prefer?
I started fighting for the ocean 6 years ago. Since then, I've seen this world continue to collapse. The ocean is the foundation of life on this planet. The fact that we're losing it at the rate we are is alarming. I think part of the reason we're failing is that we ask what is politically possible more often than we ask what is necessary.
We're in the midst of what's called the Anthropocene, which is the sixth major extinction of life on this planet. The last one was 65.2 million years ago. And the most serious one was the Permian extinction 250 million years ago, which wiped out 97% of everything. The Anthropocene has the potential to wipe out 90% of everything. It won't wipe out everything, but we will go along with that 90% that's being wiped out, so we won't survive. At the climate change conference in Paris in 2015, I said, look, the only way to do this is we need a moratorium on all industrialized heavy gear fishing for the next 50 years. That's the only thing that's going to work. We have to shut it down. Right now there's 10 million fishing vessels out there. 44 million of them, 40%, are illegal. And there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a sustainable fishery. It doesn't exist anywhere. So we have to shut it down if we care about the future.
I don't think people realize how intimate the connection we have with ocean is. It's a very foundation of life. People think that the oxygen comes from the rainforest and trees, which is true, but it's only about 28%. The rest of it comes from the ocean. The photosynthesis that are usually done by plants and trees are actually done by phytoplanktons, which are this tiny microalgae organisms that are living in the ocean. It takes the carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So it's very important for humans to actually protect the phytoplankton. And that's where the population of whales come into picture. Whale feces are very rich in iron and other nutrients that are very important for phytoplankton to be healthy. And whales are moving from depth to the surface and provide nutrients through all these layers. So all that balance in the ocean, every species depends on another. It's very important. We have to keep all this balance together.
Since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations around the world. And then when you couple that with the fact that we're destroying the world's forests, then really what we have is that this planet has two lungs. One is blue and one is green. And we're destroying both the green and the blue lungs.
What would it take to actually save the ocean?
What would it take to actually save the oceans? Well, shut down all heavy gear, industrialized fishing operations, stop sonic testing in the oceans, fracking, military sonic testing, stop dumping chemical pollutions and radioactive materials into the ocean, stop dumping agro waste from both the the meat industry and also from the production of vegetables, pesticides and everything like that. There's so many factors. Can we stop them? A few years ago, quite a few years ago, I was at a discussion in Toronto about pollution in the Don River. And the union people were there and the environmentalists were there, and everybody's saying we got to solve the problem. How are we going to solve the problem? And I just was very unpopular because I said, do we know what's causing the pollution? Do we know what factories are doing this? Well, yes, we do. Oh, stop doing it. And they all looked at me like I just said something completely outrageous and blasphemous, you know. Just stop doing it. Just turn off the taps. But no, they wanted a solution without really getting the solution.
I'm on my way to the Green Living Show. Basically, it's an expo with people selling eco products. You know, it all centers around this idea that we can shop our way to sustainability. And there's a great line from Endgame, which is, within an industrial economy, buying good things isn't really doing good for the planet so much as it is doing something not quite so bad. I think this all really serves as a distraction. You know, it points people's attention towards themselves and towards their personal habits, so that they're not looking at the root causes of these problems. They're not looking at the systems that make this culture functionally unsustainable. Instead, it's putting the blame on individuals. And I'm not saying individuals don't have responsibility, they do. But our responsibility is not to find the most eco-ethical toothbrush and buy it. Our responsibility is to stand between industry and what's left of life on this planet. Our responsibility is to deprive those who would destroy life of their ability to do so. And shopping for green products does not threaten those in power. It takes people's very real concerns about the environment and diverts that into a way to promote consumerism.
The underpinnings of these solutions are all about you as an individual, what can you do? And the answer is honestly like, don't be an individual, because as an individual, you just don't have that much power. The only power you have as an individual is, well, I can buy this instead of that, or I can try to recycle a little bit better. That's not a lot of power given the global scale of destruction.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, good.
So is this an electric car?
Yes, this is a fully electric vehicle. Pretty much with a full charge, it goes up to 383 kilometers. People love the color.
Yeah, it's very bright.
It's very bright. Very
green.
Yeah, very green.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we want.
Yeah.
So that's great.
How much energy does it take to make an electric car?
Energy to make an electric car. Well, the battery is 60 kilowatts. To make the car, I wouldn't want to give you false information,
Okay.
so I don't know.
Vote with your dollars has become a catchphrase of mainstream environmentalism. The 1950s was the first time that human beings were called consumers more often than they were called citizens. If you can convince people that their primary means of social and political action is through their personal consumption, then their choices of resistance are reduced to buying or not buying. But human beings have a much wider range of available tactics.
They want us to believe that consumer choices are the only way we can change things. But if we accept that, then that means that they've won, because we're defining ourselves as consumers. I don't think we should let them have that victory, because the reality is that, yes, we consume things. I have to buy things within this culture to survive. And that is not something that defines me or my power as an actor in this world. I would say much more fundamentally, I'm an animal, and I have hands, and I have feet, and I can walk places, and I can do things. And I have a voice, and I have the ability to speak with people and to build a relationship with people. And I have the ability to organize, and I have the ability to fight if need be. These are all much more important than my ability to buy or not buy something.
So if I'm a person who comes to this event, I'm going to come away thinking that to solve the world's environmental problems, I need to buy an electric car, buy clothing made out of bamboo and organic cotton, and get a reusable water bottle and a bamboo toothbrush. None of these things are sufficient to address the problems facing the natural world, and these are all just luxury items being produced that nobody really needs. If we're going to tackle this on a meaningful level, we need to address the root causes of this culture's unsustainability. Contrary to what we often hear, climate change did not begin with the burning of fossil fuels. It started much earlier.
The beginning of global warming is actually the beginning of agriculture. I mean, we've all seen that kind of the hockey stick graph. Fossil fuel has this huge CO2 release, and so it, all of a sudden, just boom, starts going up. And that's true. But if you back that up 10,000 years, human activity actually released that much carbon from the beginning of agriculture to the year 1800, as we did from 1800 till now. So how? What is this about? Well, huge amounts of carbon are stored in soil. And when you do agriculture, you're destroying the soil, essentially. So as the soil falls to pieces, all that carbon is released. We live in an agricultural society, which makes it really hard for us to examine the nature of agriculture. To us, it's like air. It's just what's there. It's just how things happen, like how we get food. There's not even a question that there's another way, because this has been happening now for so long. 10,000 years is how long some humans have been doing agriculture. And agriculture started in probably 14 different places around the globe. And it always starts in river valleys, and there's a reason for that. The reason is that agriculture is based on annual grasses, and where you're going to get the most annual grasses is in river valleys. So there's two different kinds of plants. There's annuals and there's perennials. Annuals only live 1 year. That's why they're called annual. And the perennials live a long time. So the annuals, their moment is when there's a disturbance across the landscape. So a fire, a flood, an earthquake. What happens is that the ground is bare. And the planet recognizes this as a biological emergency. So, nature has come up with ways to fix this as fast as it can, and the answer is annuals. When there's no competition, the annuals spring to life. So one way to think about it is they're the first responders. Or think about, if you cut yourself with, a knife or a pair of scissors or something, you're going to put a Band-Aid on that. And that's what the annuals are. They're the Band-Aid. And eventually, just like your skin will knit back together, the roots of the perennials will come back. Those perennial plants will close in across that disaster area again. And there will be that tightly knit web of perennial roots once more. But until that happens, all you have is annuals. So 95% of plants are perennials on the planet, and about 5% are annuals. So they certainly have their role, but there's no landscapes where it's just annuals. That's the problem with agriculture, is that it's based on these annual grasses. Now the only way you're going to get those to grow is to clear the life off the land. They can't compete against the perennials. So for 10,000 years, we've essentially been waging a war. So if you think about what agriculture is on a really just basic scale, you take a piece of land, you clear every living thing off it, and I mean down to the bacteria, and then you plant it to human use. So it's biotic cleansing. I mean, we've all heard of ethnic cleansing. Well, this is the same thing, except it's not just humans. It's every last living creature, just gone. So it's this massive war that we've been waging, and every season you have to keep it up. Because, of course, life fights back. Life wants to live. The problem now is so bad that 98% of the world's old-growth forests and 99% of the world's grasslands have been destroyed. And this is all in the service of agriculture. So humans have taken over every piece of land that could be taken for this activity. There's nothing left to take. What this means is that 200 species are going extinct each and every day. They haven't just been extirpated, they're gone forever. And that's what we've done by taking up agriculture.
They say that agriculture increases food production, but that's completely false. What it does, it grossly decreases food production, but it funnels whatever food production there is toward humans. But in terms of actual food production, when you include food production for all the non-humans who live here, no, it's grossly reduced. And one of the things that agriculture does is it commits you to a path of further destruction, because you have more food for humans, but you do so at the cost of the health of the land base. So you slowly decrease the carrying capacity of the land base because you've overshot it. And as you destroy your land base, you have a choice. You can either collapse, or you can continue to find new frontiers to exploit. The problem is somebody else already lives there, which means your way of life has to be militarized because you're going to conquer them. And also you have to destroy the environment of the places nearby.
So this is an inherently destructive activity, and it kind of snowballs into worse and worse things. So the moment you clear that land, that soil starts being destroyed. One season of planting your annual crop, pick whichever, wheat, soy, corn, you can lose 2,000 years worth of topsoil. That's how slowly topsoil grows and how easily it is destroyed. When the Europeans first got to the Midwest, the prairie soil was 12 feet deep, and it can now only be measured in inches. So it's gone. We blew through it all in a very short period of time. So that's the nature of agriculture. Like, there's not a better way to do this. There's not like a kinder, gentler form of agriculture. It's literally what it is. You remove all the life and then you draw down the soil. And in the process, you also draw down water, and you draw down species, and you draw down entire biotic communities.
The Fertile Crescent is where a lot of these problems started, and you've seen it now, and it doesn't look like a Fertile Crescent at all. It's treeless, horizon to horizon. But that was before the beginnings of this culture. That was cedar forest, so thick that sunlight never touched the ground. It was like this, thicker because sunlight's touching the ground over there. And this culture has destroyed that, converted it to agriculture, and then converted it to desert. That's what happens. Forests precede us, and deserts dog our heels.
During the era of the Black Plague in Europe, anywhere from like 1/3 to 3/4 of the population died, depending on where you were. So what happened pretty quickly was all the agricultural fields were abandoned because there were no people left, and the forest starts to take over. And there's actually a dip in the carbon in the atmosphere because Europe was at least partially reforested at that moment. So you can see that actually it responds pretty quickly. If we could get some plants back in the ground that can sequester carbon, it could happen. And this is why I am not in any way out of hope. If we were to repair even 75% of the trashed out prairies in the United States, in about 10 years, we could sequester all of the carbon that we have released in this country, basically, period. We would actually become a nation that sequesters carbon. Around the globe, if we could repair 75% of the world's grasslands, we could sequester all of the carbon that's been released since the beginning of the industrial age till now, and pretty quickly. And that's really all it takes, is we have to just let life come back.
Fish sequester carbon in their bodies and excrete gut rocks, which help balance the acidity of the ocean. Industrial fishing has wiped out 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Mangroves, salt marshes, seagrasses, and peat bogs have similarly been decimated, and could similarly sequester a lot of carbon if we stopped destroying them and allowed them to come back. The natural world is our best ally for pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. Yet the mainstream climate movement demands we plunder what remains of our already decimated planet in order to produce solar panels and wind turbines to add energy to the grid. Energy which will power the further destruction of the planet. The mainstream environmental movement has completely lost touch with reality. I'm here at the Climate March in Montreal. They're expecting about 300,000 people today, mostly youth, who are here marching, thinking that they're fighting for their futures and they're fighting to stop climate change. But when you look at the explicitly stated demands of the big organizations who are putting this together, what they're asking for is a swift transition to 100% renewable energy. So that's not gonna stop or even slow climate change. It's only gonna make things worse.
What do we want? Climate justice! What do we want it now?
The thing that blows me away is the length to which people will go in order to avoid looking at the problem. That they will create all these extraordinary fantasies in order to do something that's not going to help the planet, so they can avoid looking at the real issue, which is that industrial civilization itself is what's killing the planet.
So this word civilization, what does that actually mean? Well, just etymologically, it means people living in cities. Okay, but what does that actually mean? Well, it means people living in densities large enough that they require the importation of resources. So just think about this, common sense level. 8 million people cannot live on an island called Manhattan, right? Where does their food come from? Where does their water come from? Where does the energy come from? And that's the problem with cities, okay? The city has used up its own. Whatever it is, it's not there. So now where are they going to get it? Well, from that point forward, it doesn't actually matter what kinds of beautiful, peaceful, nonviolent, spiritual values people hold in their hearts. Your society is now dependent on imperialism and genocide because nobody willingly gives up their land, their water, their trees, their fish. But since the city has used up its own, it's got to go out and get those from somewhere else. So the pattern of civilization is always the same. You've got this bloated power center right at the middle, and then it's surrounded by conquered colonies. And the power center takes whatever it can, brings it all back in. Eventually it collapses because we're on drawdown, we're on overshoot. Historically speaking, civilizations had a natural endpoint. They were only going to get so big before they eventually would collapse. And so that's what you see, whether it's South America, North America, Asia, Africa, Europe, it's the same pattern over and over. There have been 34 civilizations to date. They have all ended in collapse. This one will be no different. The only difference is this one right now, we've added this incredible accelerant of fossil fuel.
I grew up in Seattle, and what is now downtown Seattle with skyscrapers and concrete as far as you can see used to be old growth forest with cedar and Douglas fir and hemlock and maple and all these other trees, old growth trees, thousands upon thousands of years old. The trees in the urban areas of the Pacific Northwest, for example in Vancouver, BC, what's now downtown Vancouver used to be old growth forest. And there used to be trees 400 feet tall there. And there's records of this. And those trees, they were Douglas firs in this case, those would be the tallest trees in the world today. People think the redwoods are the tallest trees in the world, and it's only because the tallest Douglas firs, who are quite a bit taller, have all been cut down. And they were cut down, among other things, to build these cities.
We in this culture have come to conflate this way of life with all life on the planet. If I say I want to end civilization, they say, oh, you want to end life. But the problem is that this culture is ending life. And some people have accused me of being cruel because I want to bring down civilization, and that will make it so people who are reliant upon modern medicines will die. I have Crohn's disease and coronary artery disease, and without modern medicines, I would die. I am one of those people. But I realize that the world is more important than I am.
I think a lot of people, the easier thing is to say things like, well, it's greed is the problem. It's like, okay, so we actually have a society that it's not just about greed. I mean, we actually reward greed on a massive scale. Right? So what are the social rewards? What are the political rewards? What are the financial rewards? Well, that system is actually called capitalism, at least right now. I mean, there's certainly other versions of it. I don't mean to say it's the only one. But right now, it's capitalism across the globe. And that's what it does. Right? It takes living communities. It converts those into dead commodities. And then those dead commodities are turned into private wealth. And a lot of people think, well, if we just make that into public wealth, if we all could get an equal piece of the pie, that's the solution. This is the problem. That's not going to be a solution because you've still got the first two parts of that equation. Why are we taking the living planet and turning it into dead commodities? That's the problem. I don't actually care in the end who gets all the goodies. It's the fact that rivers and grasslands and forests and fish have been turned into those dead commodities. That's the problem.
What do all the so-called solutions to global warming have in common? They all take industrial capitalism as a given. The natural world is having to conform to industrial capitalism. They've switched the dependent and independent variables. That the world has to be primary, and the health of the world has to be primary, because without a world you don't have any economy whatsoever. And they're quite explicit. The Bright Greens are very explicit about this. What they're trying to save is industrial capitalism, industrial civilization. They say this all the time. And that's my fundamental beef, is that what I'm trying to save is the real world.
Bright green environmentalism has gained popularity because it tells a lot of people what they want to hear. That you can have industrial civilization and a planet too. It allows people to feel good about maintaining this destructive way of living, and to avoid asking hard questions about the depth of what must be changed.
I think that a 100% renewable world would not look very different than the one we live in now. Even if you snapped your fingers and that happened tomorrow, I think that global warming would continue to be a huge problem. You'd still have all the emissions from logging, from concrete production, from steel production, from consumer goods, from global shipping, from all these things. And of course, that renewable energy would still be used to power this, to power the global economy.
If space aliens came down from outer space and they were changing the climate and they were putting in mines everywhere, we wouldn't care whether the mined materials are going to be used to make windmills or to make solar panels to power the alien economy, the occupier economy. What we would do is we would stop the occupiers. We would do whatever's necessary to make it so these space aliens can't change our climate. And when you change your loyalty from the system to the planet, it does become their economy, not our economy. And it does become a matter of stopping their economy.
There's war being waged on the natural world every day. Yet when we talk about fighting back, people look at us like we're crazy. The vast majority of environmentalists in this culture do not perceive that we are in a war. They love this culture and they see that it has some problems. And I see that we're living in a culture that is not broken. It was set up this way. It was set up to exploit and to steal and to use violence to take what it needs. That's the history of this culture. And I do not see how to stop it without force.
What I don't understand is why we're not fighting back. Because what I do know is that if there's anybody alive to look back 100 years from now, they are going to wonder what the fuck was wrong with us, that we didn't fight when the planet was going down. Now you love something, or you wouldn't be listening to this. Whatever you love, it is under assault. But love is a verb. We've got to let our love call us to action.
I spent 3 years making a film about the ocean. It is only now that I've learned that the production of so-called green technology represents one of the largest upcoming threats to the ocean. They want to mine the deep sea to provide the materials necessary for the proliferation of so-called green technology. A recent study estimates that 2 million cubic feet of sediment will be processed each day by each mining vessel. The resulting slurry will be dumped back into the ocean, where it will increase turbidity, smother and bury organisms, and toxify the food web with heavy metals. The ocean, which is the source of all life, has become the next sacrifice zone in the name of green technology. People claim that the future of electric cars may depend on deep-sea mining. What if we switched what is primary and instead said that the future of the ocean depends on stopping car culture? Or that the future of the ocean depends on opposing so-called green technology? Evidently, this culture does not care whether the ocean has a future. It's more interested in justifying continued exploitation under the banner of green consumerism. What we desperately need is an environmental movement that's willing to put nature first, that's willing to put life on this planet above this way of life. We need people who will look honestly at the problems and have the courage to ask the right questions. Most importantly, we need to get to work, to stop the destruction and allow life to come back.